like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1999, the podcast where we talk about the films of 1999 strapped to a board with knives coming out our body here in 2021. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Nybart.
And I'm Phil Lescove.
And with us today is a man, I believe we've been hunting him down for 3 years and we finally got him. David Ehrlich of Indiewire. Thank you so much for coming on the show to do this film.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
It's I don't want to speak for Kenny, but I'll speak for myself in saying that you're one of my favorite film critics out there. I appreciate the no holds barred way that you review films. I think that most people are too afraid. So I appreciate your courage.
Sure, thanks.
No, but true. I truly I think that very few critics expect movies to be as good as you want them to be. And I think about your top 10, or I don't even know how many movies you put into your top video montage at the end of every year, which I imagine is a enormous undertaking. And
maybe too much of an undertaking, but yeah.
but I look forward to them every year, and I think there's so I appreciate you taking the time to come on here.
I can hate and also love movies.
That's what I'm saying.
The worst part of my job and most frequent is when the movies fall in the vast spectrum in between, and
sure.
I have to muster some sort of way of conveying interest when I'm not really interested in them myself.
That's brutal.
And that actually gets harder, I found, as I get older, and my attention span gets shorter. But
I imagine that, and I think I can speak for Kenny when I say, we're covering every film of 99, and there are times when we sit down in front of a film that we've never seen before, and perhaps for a reason, and you sit down and you're just like, well, okay, so this is going to take 2 hours of my life. And,
did you guys front load this by just starting with all the ones you loved, as anyone naturally would, and then just doing the dregs now?
I think we've been pretty smart about how we've paced out most of it, but yeah, I hear what you're saying, Kenny.
You know what kind of happened was we were pretty cognizant of this is going to last for a certain period of time, and we want to have all these temples throughout. Fortunately, in 1999, there's so many temples, right? But what we started to notice was we did hammock a little, about a year ago, because we haven't done Fight Club yet. We haven't done Being John Malkovich, Magnolia. We haven't done a lot of really big films that we love, purposely saving it for the end. But there was a period of time where we'd run it because we had guests on. They tore into the teen movies. So we did all these teen movies in the beginning, and we're running through all the movies that are just exhausting, like these middling movies. We just did The Minus Man, David. So we sat down and watched The Minus Man, and the first thing I thought, I don't have 2 hours for this. I cannot give myself to this thing for 2 hours. And
story of my life.
I believe you. Yeah. But Girl on the Bridge, I'd never seen. Phil's been talking about it for a while.
It's crazy because I felt like every American has seen The Girl on the Bridge, of course.
If I have to go to another dinner party where they're talking about Girl on the Bridge.
Yeah.
I was shocked that when you guys sent me the list of movies that were available and you had considered discussing that it was even on there, just because it seems to have flown so far under the radar and was sort of rendered to obscurity forever just by virtue of Paramount's DVD strategy, which there wasn't one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and first thing the first thing I said to Phil was, no matter what happens for the rest of our lives, I will always remember that you were the one that got me to watch Girl on the Bridge. I was blown the fuck away by this film. Awesome. One of the best films we've done this year.
Yeah, it's a movie that I don't know if you, and I obviously want to hear your thoughts on this in a second, but I saw the film when it came out. It came out here stateside in the year 2000. It played some festivals in 99, which is why we're going to include it in this. But I remember it was part of Paramount Vantage. Am I right in that regard? Yeah. So they just never really got behind it, it feels like. I mean, you still can't get this in high definition anywhere. It's a movie that's unfortunately kind of a bit of a relic. And I tweeted about this yesterday, but it feels like a Criterion thing. It would be amazing if Criterion got behind something like this, but I don't know.
It would, and as far as I can tell, I think it would be the first time they released a Patrice Leconte film, and this doesn't feel like the place where they would probably start. But I'm right there with you. I mean, like, I would love nothing more. Was it Paramount? It was Paramount Classics. It was
Paramount Classics, yes.
It was even before Paramount Vantage.
Right.
And now there's none of them. But,
Sure.
But, yeah, I mean, it was sort of... should I go into my whole spiel?
Please,
now, like,
absolutely. We'd love to hear
this?
about how it came into your life.
Yeah, so let's rewind the clocks to the magical summer of 2000. When, I was almost 16 at the time, and I was just thinking earlier today that like the fact that I saw this movie, that I found some way to get to the movie theater in Connecticut where I lived at the time before I had my license, says and reminds me more about who I was than almost any other factoid I can think of from that part of my life. Like, I was hoping that we wouldn't go into
I'm from
that.
Westchester.
I lived in the shameful streets of Greenwich, but
hey, buddy, I'm from Chappaqua, so you got a kindred spirit in shame.
yeah, I mean there are all sorts of asterisks that I am dying to put next to that label for myself, but we don't have the time. No
I've been to Greenwich, obviously to go shopping for high-end wares, but I know that Greenwich isn't all kind of polo stores and.
Yeah, we lived on the rough side of town. I was the town.
There is a rough side of town.
There actually is. I was talking to Christopher Abbott, the actor Christopher Abbott, about this. I was interviewing him for a movie called The World to Come, and he can actually pull off the rough side of Greenwich element a lot more convincingly than I can.
He's from Greenwich too?
He was I think he was mostly grew up in Stanford, but yeah, he's from Greenwich. And,
I love Him and Girls so much because the beginning of that, when he's in it the first season, he is the kind of softer side of Greenwich, and then when he comes back for the Panic at Central Park, he is the tough side of Greenwich.
Yeah,
he's got that accent. She's like, "Where'd you get that accent? What accent are you talking about?"
It's just like the Greenwich vibe so doesn't square with his entire screen image. But my family was sort of like the town's token Jews, and they had a little bubble for us to live.
So wait, how did were you driving, or how did you even get to this?
So that's a good question. I do not know. I mean, it must have taken some effort is really what sticks out to me about it. Is I either must have like scrounged up for a cab or convinced my mom to drive me. But I must have, because
Where'd you go? What theater?
I went to a theater that, as far as I know, I haven't fact checked this, but in family lore, it was a theater that was actually created originally, not in its current incarnation, but by my grandfather, who, when he emigrated to the United States in the early 40s and escaped the Holocaust, eventually found his way into the movie theater business. And he was the original proprietor of what is now the AMC 25 in Times Square. I think it was like a one-screen porn theater back when he started it. And now, as of course you and all of your listeners remember, and in the theater in downtown Greenwich on the railroad station, as far as I know, I have not fact-checked this, but I'm just going to choose to believe the exact truth, was the original proprietor of that place as well, long before I was born.
My mom told me my grandfather invented the fire escape, so we're.
I heard that too about your grandfather.
I'm not kidding.
That's amazing.
So that one man had to invent the fire escape.
I like it takes like one picture of like 1940s New York to be like, wait a second, your grandpa was 8 at this time. So yes,
listen, he was really precocious, but
very sad.
Yeah, my grandfather, by the time I was born, lived in Florida, where he did. I can tell you as a fact, because I went to them while he owned a small chain of movie theaters.
Sure.
So I went to the theater and.
Just to pause for a quick second.
Yeah.
What drew you to this movie in the first place? Had you seen any of like?
I know, I definitely hadn't. Okay. I mean, but like, that's what I'm saying is that like the fact that I would have gone through the energy, because I don't have like some sort of supervillain origin story as to when I became interested in movies and began poisoning the well for everybody else. And I
love that about you, by the way.
Yeah.
But I must have given enough of a shit about them to, in the summer of 2000, when I was 15 years old, gone and seen this black and white French art film at the theater. And I remember reading, Roger Ebert's review that was syndicated in the Greenwich Times, and I think he gave it 3.5 stars, and something about it must have decided that, and that I, who was apparently had nothing but time on my Friday or Saturday nights over that summer, was going to go do this. I think I dragged somebody along. I think I remember who they were, and so I went and saw it. I just remember being completely intoxicated by it. This is a movie that I don't know what sort of audience it would find nowadays. I think its intoxicating power still remains. I mean, there's this sort of timeless quality about it. I love that it is ostensibly set in the present day, but really could also feel as if, it's such an homage to films from the 60s and the time period, but it feels, aside from the occasional cell phone or like modern flourish, like it comes from that past. But there's something so overwhelmingly romantic about it when you're a 15-year-old boy who is really sort of getting in touch with that side of yourself. The idea of from the 7-minute opening scene with a young Vanessa Paradis and sitting there with her shag sweater and her gap teeth and talking about all of her sexual escapades that are rolling off of her life like water off of a duck's back. I mean, it's all feels kind of like an adolescent male fantasy now, and may have then as well, but that is exactly what spoke to me about it, I think, at the time.
Were you watching a lot of foreign films at that age?
Yeah, I was. I mean, as close to an origin story as I had as being in 9th grade and stealing my dad's credit card and buying the Seven Samurai DVD off Amazon. How I decided to do that, I do not know. But that was a $40 charge that definitely boomeranged back around on my ass when he got his film. It was worth it.
I mean, if there is an origin story, that's it. You buying a that very much feels like that tracks. Yeah.
I used to do that in college with the bursar. You had like the bursar where you can go to the store, the bookstore where they sold everything. Right. And I would just buy DVDs there. Sure. So I would buy all these DVDs. That 95% of my collection were things that I bought at the bookstore then. So yeah, I did the same thing with Rashomon. Thought I was very cool, and then
I just remember the thing that really floored me when I saw it back in '99 is the photography. I mean, it is an absolutely stunning, beautiful movie to look at. I mean, aside from it's black and white, and there's obviously a sheen of classiness that comes with any sort of black and white film for except Clerks, but I mean for the most part they're classy, and this film just radiates just the beauty of these locations of Europe and what have you. It was also the first time that I'd seen Vanessa Paradis in anything, and she is just luminescent in this film. I mean, I'm not sure she's ever been this sort of charming and inviting.
I mean, I'm almost sure that she hasn't, but I mean, which is not to impugn her her career after that. And I did, as a matter of course, get into her pop albums after I saw this movie, because if I am in for a penny, I'm in for a pound. Basically, the shit that I love. But it is the rare movie that is actually classier than Clerks. It pulls that off, and everything is central to that. But it was part of the whole element of discovery, of happenstance, of seeing this movie without much fanfare and feeling like you were one of the only people that it had sort of appeared to, and sometimes in those situations, whether it's finding something or catching something late at night on TV. I mean, I don't know how these things happen anymore, but
they don't. Kids don't like phones anymore. Yeah,
sad. It's all
TikToks
and
TikTok.
It's all their TikToks and their WandaVisions.
Corroding the young minds of America. But I felt a sort of a parasocial kinship to the actors in the movie, so much that like when I would ever see Daniel Auteuil in a movie, in a Patrice Leconte movie after this, it would be like I felt a certain closeness to him.
He's yours.
Yeah, exactly. Like knowing.
Yeah, you feel that now with. You feel that now with. I mean, I think everyone around our age. I don't know, Dave, how you feel about this. So everyone around our age kind of has that relationship with the cast of Friday Night Lights to some extent, where they all kind of feel like ours moving forward.
Jesse Plemons is mine, damn it. Get your hands off of him.
It's funny because I don't think older audiences quite understand what Jesse Plemons or Michael B. Jordan mean to us. They're just like, just a couple movie stars. One guy's handsome, one not so much. Who knows? But you do, when you have these people that are in films when you're young and impressionable, that other people don't seem to be aware of.
I think impressionability is a word I've been dancing around a lot today when thinking about this movie and the age at which I saw it, just because it feels like a movie designed for a spongy brain who is new to a lot of the things that it's drafting off of, but is, hormonal enough to immediately sort of be open to everything this movie is serving, and then instantly drunk on the only thing they've ever been drunk on, which are like the black and white luminescent, monochrome cinematography that's throwing at you, this sort of like pan-European flavor that's going to all these exotic locations that you knew existed but had never really been it made that accessible and sort of jubilant and alive for you in that way. And it's all very light and fluffy. It's not particularly deep, but it's touched with this sense of wisdom, of knowing, of this like romantic, elemental sort of been around the block quality that all feels true to a 15-year-old who's never been in that kind of love before. And it's, I just remember just being like forged by it in real time in a way.
As a 38-year-old who just watched it for the first time yesterday, I can report same feelings.
Yeah.
Like I almost look at you watching it at 15 and I feel bad. You're like a person who lost their virginity at 15 to the hottest woman of all time. And
it's
like
alarming how true that is to my life. Yeah.
How does anything compare? After I watched, in my opinion, yesterday, the greatest sex scene I've ever seen in film. The first time under the sheet with the knives was the most I have been emotionally and like kind of on a gut level affected by a sex scene, which of course had no actual sex.
Yeah, I mean, they never even kissed in the end.
They never even
kiss. I love it so much.
There was something so I couldn't believe it. I don't shake, but I could feel it in my body. My temperature rising as I was watching that scene. It happened again. I mean, the scene when it was the two of them
by the
alone.
Train tracks.
Yeah. And then I also thought, the very simplistic metaphor, but it works really well, of him one, cheating on her and failing, and then two, him not being able to get it up. I mean, the one where he throws the knife and the knife doesn't even stick in. Like that's some good shit for me right there. That's enough. This stuff works for me, even as a grown up.
That's sort of the gambit of the movie, and that in the first scene it establishes how meaningless sex is in the world of this film. I mean, like, it's not much of a currency to him. I mean, he does, and then certainly for her, it's clearly been something that she's used to value herself and as a weapon to, not a weapon, but like a way of trying to interface with luck and all these men that she comes across, but it's not obviously galvanizing anything in her life. And so you can't really, in that context, build up to a sex scene that's supposed to forge something meaningful for her between these characters. They have to be sort of past sex in a way.
Well, if anything, the sex has actually shown her to be unlucky. Like, if anything, it's brought her more problems than it has brought her anything good.
Just in terms of film history, and I think A.O. Scott brings this up in his review, but I think he's 100% correct. He didn't love the movie the way I loved it.
Yeah.
Sex in general in film has lost its currency. When I think about great sex scenes of the last 20 years, we're talking about generally homosexual like sex scenes because they're new. You're talking about Blue is the Warmest Color. You're talking about Portrait of a Lady. You're talking about Brokeback.
Yeah.
You're talking about things that haven't been shown on film. The best cisgender hetero sex scene in the last 20 years, I can't think of it.
I don't know what it is.
Because I've seen it all, whether it's here or in, the theater your grandfather used to own in Times Square. Well,
I mean, I think just for the record, everybody knows, of course, that the best cisgender hetero sex scene, as you put it, in the last 20 years is, of course, in 40 Days and 40 Nights when Josh Hartnett and Shannon Sossaman
finally
puts the fucking flower petals on her, and it's
obvious
orgasm.
Right. I thought it went without saying.
That was understood.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. I did think, but I mean, I think I think that, to some extent, the ones people remember are the really over the top lush ones, like in The Notebook or something like that, that have actually broken through to the point where we've gone almost beyond the Rubicon, where we're back to the most elemental parts of, we did Cinema Paradiso for our Patreon a couple weeks ago, which basically is, that's a montage of all the great
kissing. Yeah. All the great kisses.
Yeah, all the great pre-code and right after code kisses of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And it does feel, after watching Cinema of Paradiso, you did everything you could do by 1989. No one knew what to do with sex in the 90s. That's why almost every studio movie made in the 90s is super weird about sex. Since then, we've just been trying to.
I feel like Verhoeven was the only guy who was really trying to do anything with it in the 90s.
And it wasn't sexy. I mean, it was a certain thing.
Sure. It was, it just feels
like murder with your sex.
Well, I think it's interesting because, Kenny and I we're going on Screen Drafts to talk about Bruckheimer's films. So I just recently watched Flashdance, which was written by Joe Esterhaz. And it feels like Joe Esterhaz had obviously that sort of crazy meteoric rise and amazing amount of money made off of writing these sort of titillating thrillers in the 90s. But to Kenny's point, they're not sexy unless you're into ice picks, I guess. I mean, if that's your thing.
So just to put a point on my really long point.
Yes.
Is a fine point is nothing they could have done to each other would have been as emotionally resonant and sexually resonant and romantic as what they did in this film. And frankly, that's kind of what I've been craving for the longest time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's, I obviously she is a bit of the Vanessa Paradis character is a bit of a male fantasy, but in a way that's not dissimilar from the sort of mindset of a lot of the characters in Patrice Leconte films. But there's also an element that is kind of extra romantic to, again, a 15-year-old hormonal boy seeing this movie, because she's saying that all the sex that I've had, not that it's going to make you less sexually interested in her, but she's like, it didn't really do anything for me. It didn't move the needle. It's not what I'm looking for. It kind of took the pressure off all the soft boys in the world. It's just there's something more important than that. You can get a woman, right, a gamine beauty like Vanessa Paradis, if you strike a more sort of, what's the word? An ethereal connection of some kind.
Well, their connection is, bordering on supernatural, which is
it's The Last Jedi. I mean,
Jedi, of course. I was just going to say the Force. All the Force talk made me think of them of The Last Jedi, but also just the fact that they're only lucky together. I mean, this idea that they are a chemical equation of sorts is just, I don't know. It's so endearing. It's so charming.
It is, I think, and that's another one of the movie's strengths, exactly what you said, that it is a very sweet and pure-hearted movie, which allows it to really go into cartoonish directions with the sort of carnivalesque violence in a way, not, blood and guts violence, but just the kind of noirish, hard characters down on your luck. No one gives a shit about each other. I'm throwing knives at you. Veneer of it all. It's just built on this bedrock of sweetness.
And I think the movie is meant to be taken 100% literally, which I love about it. See, I watched it thinking, all right, girl on a bridge, she jumps into the water in the first, 5 minutes of the movie. I've seen Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I thought I knew how this thing worked, right? So I watched it assuming that they were dead, right? And that nothing that happened in that movie, I thought that would be our big reveal at the end of the day, they were dead. And what that allowed me to do watching the film was completely let go. I completely let go of any pretense I had that this existed in the plane we currently live on. And the fact that wasn't the case allowed me to really appreciate this film in an artistic way. And I think I read a few reviews that I thought were a little dismissive of this on an artistic level. I go into this being someone who I love Godard very much. There were three influences that A.O. Scott brought up: Godard, Fellini, and I can't really remember the third. But love Godard, but haven't done a big deep dive into European cinema in general. And I'm also not someone who will generally seek out foreign films outside of the ones that have already been kind of pre-sold to me. Nor will I do that with black and white films. So I'm not really your audience. It kind of needs to be pre-sold in these ways. And I have always had a bit of a bias against black and white films. The reason being, I think it is a bad point I'm about to make, but making a black and white film is a decision. and certainly in modern times since the advent of color. You've made a decision to do a certain thing, and the decision can't just be I think it's classier, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just the decision can't be I think it's more artistic. That's none of these things are true. What the film's like you use is not that doesn't evoke class, doesn't evoke artistry. It has nothing to do with that. In this film, I think it was really to separate the viewer from reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Purposely.
Yeah.
I think that was a decision that was made that you are not in our world. You were in a dream world. And it really allowed me for really one of the first times where it was a choice, not a necessity. So not really a movie, before 1960, to embrace the possibilities of black and white in a way I really hadn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's wild is that Patrice Leconte had not decided to shoot it in black and white. I don't think it had even occurred to him until a month before they began production, where he just woke up from a dream and saw the movie in his head in black and white. And that's unfathomable to think about what this looks like in color. But I think you hit the nail on the head, which is just that it's a movie that needs to pry you away from logic in order to work. And it has a number of different ways of doing that. I mean, I think for me, I remember being so struck the first time I saw it of just that weird sort of afterlife. And you're talking about, you thinking these characters are dead. I think that seed is kind of planted in the first scene where it's it is kind of like the Japanese movie Afterlife or Defending Your Life or something like that, where it feels like she's in a courtroom, maybe. We don't really know. It seems like there's a jury, but it also kind of feels like she's being judged, at the pearly gates or something. And then by the time you have him, for me, what really separates it from reality is actually the shot of the fly in the hospital. For some reason, it's it is kind of like a Jean-Pierre Jeunet thing that was in vogue at the time, sort of hyper-real choice, but it's also just zooming in on that fly in the way that it does. It's okay, we're in a cartoon, we're in a live action cartoon now. And from that point on, it just gets more and more unloosed from reality until you're really in a Tintin or a Lupin the Third or something like that by the end. And the more it goes in that direction, the more I love it. It plays into a kind of a Eurocentric exoticism that there are a lot of things about this movie that might read differently now. I mean, I'm really glad that you enjoyed it watching it for the first time, but it's I wonder if this movie were made now, if the sort of capricious attitude it takes to suicide would raise a lot of alarms, if the very sort of male fantasy element of the Vanessa Paradis character would rub people the wrong way. But there's also something so innocent about it that it's just it's made for it's made to spirit you away into kind of a more innocent time. And I don't know if there's anything pernicious about it. I don't know. I watch it now and I'm I can see how people would reject this, but I think they'd be missing out.
Well, I think it's interesting. You bring up Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who was someone I thought of as I was watching it yesterday as well. I think that this film has a much, much lighter and touch than Jean-Pierre Jeunet. The magic realism and the sort of the balance that this film finds, I think, is incredibly deft. I love Jean-Pierre Jeunet, and I think Amelie's a great movie, but that's obviously going to a much different place than this movie is. And in terms of just really kind of dialing everything up a lot more, this film, I think, short of the force talk that we talked about a little bit and this idea of luck, doesn't necessarily really play in the currency of the supernatural in the way that obviously a lot of Jean-Pierre Jeunet's films do. But I just love the tone that it finds, this darkly comedic. I mean, I think about the jilted bride strapped to a wheel at the end, which is just is wonderful and funny, and how it's all going to end, obviously. But this movie's.
I thought she was going to. I thought that was.
Oh, you thought she was going to. Fair enough. But I don't know. This film just. It checks so many boxes and lives in such a beautiful little sort of ecosystem of its own. And it really is a shame that this film didn't find a bigger audience, because I do think that it is, and I hate to even say this, but it does feel like an accessible foreign film. It does feel like a film that, had it been sort of rolled out in a different way, might have found a bigger audience. And, we talked a little, we feel like we take ownership of to some degree, or that we plant our flags on. And this was one of those films that I felt like, I never saw it. I saw it early on, obviously, and no one had ever heard of it. You can't even really get it right now. It does feel like this wonderful little thing that I hope that our listeners will search out.
Yeah, I mean, there are places to find it that I cannot in good conscience even suggest that I know.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, they are out there. I remember buying a Korean DVD in 2002, I think, just because I needed the safety of owning it in some way.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah. And
it's the kind of film, had I watched it when I was younger, I would have been obsessed. I used to watch Contempt over and over and over again. Sometimes you just get kind of lost in these films, right? And I would have watched this over and over and over again. And so I do feel like I missed out to some extent.
Well, I love that Kenny texted me yesterday after watching the film and said, if I saw this film back in 2000, I think my life would have been different.
I actually do think my life would have been different. I said to Phil, I'm very, very into kind of movies that have the unabashed sincerity of a movie like this, right? Yeah. Just throws all pretense and irony away. And it takes different forms. Like Moulin Rouge is one of my favorite movies. It's so unabashedly romantic. True Romance, I think, is unabashedly romantic. The movie this reminded me of the most was Punch Drunk Love, which was also this idea of like all this shit in the world, all this craziness and chaos, whatever, can be not fixed, but you can find your port in the storm with one person. Yeah. And I loved the kind of the simplicity of that. And look, I think for me at least, it was kind of true, right? Like that does kind of mirror my life. I was a complete fucking mess before I met my wife, and now I have 4 kids, and I'm a complete fucking mess for a different reason.
I'm a complete fucking mess, and with my wife. But first of all, Punch Drunk Love is not something I think I'd have thought of explicitly in terms of this movie before, but as soon as you mention it, I mean, if you need, for the people out there who have not seen Girl on the Bridge, if you need a point of reference, if you need like if you like this, then watch this. I mean, you can't really do any better than that. And it's a very similar energy. And there's also the line of dialogue, talking about Port in the Storm, that jumps out at me from this movie is when they say, there's no wrong road, only bad company. And like that,
I feel that.
I think especially the older you get, I mean, we're married now, 5 kids between us, you and I, Kenny.
I am not married and have no kids, but you guys are doing great.
5 good kids, all 3. Well, I was going to say I'm grateful that only one of those 5 is mine. But like so much, we were talking before we started recording about caring less about things, and I was saying like I find it really difficult to give less of a shit about some of the pettier things that I cared about before I have a kid, but now that I have less time, less energy, less mental bandwidth to do it, I end up feeling like I'm failing on those things more than I ever was before.
Sure.
And I think that so much of that stems from this idea of the whatever self-image we had and the aspirations that came with it and the things we want to accomplish in one's life that we measure ourselves by. And here you have these 2 characters who are vagabonds throughout the prettiest ports in Europe. And she's constantly band-aided up together because he's throwing knives at her, and they're making pennies on the dollar, whatever. They don't have enough money to pay for their hotel room unless they use their force bond to win at roulette or whatever the case might be. And they... a lot of movies have sort of leaned on this idea before, but they have each other and nothing on their own. And I don't think monogamy is the road to happiness for everybody out there, but there is a sense of all the petty things that we chase in this life and that we think are going to matter at the end of the day.
Well, this makes me...
all of those accomplishments fade.
We're not trying to make you feel bad.
Oh no! I understand that you guys are luckier than I am, but I'll just say this:
I was trying to make you feel better.
But all of this makes me think of arguably one of my favorite lines in the film. It's around the midway point, and basically, Adele, played by Vanessa Paradis, sees a young waiter who she's attracted to. And essentially, Gabor is sort of tempting her and saying, like, you can go down that road if you want to go down that road. And he says a line where he says, we always think that luck is what we don't have. And I just think that line is just, it's perfect. And it really encapsulates, everything the film is trying to say.
Yeah. And there's like a really nice, there is an element of fatedness to the way these characters come together. They happen to go and try and commit suicide on the same bridge the same night, but they're your own luck. I mean, like there are the matters of happenstance. There's the woman who picks the the wrong hand and is crushed by that. There's a great scene early on where this woman hits on him, and he's like, oh, he picks the wrong hand, and you can just see her collapse inwards because she like knows what that means. And there's the fly picking the right cube of sugar and so on, but like so much of what keeps them together and ricocheting back to one another, or away from other things back to each other, is about the luck that they make, or like decide is luck, the kismet and the connection that they won't see as luck. I don't know. I mean, it's like, it is kind of like life is going to serve you certain things, and it's really up to you to decide what to make.
Well, and it's a little bit of perspective, and the grass is always greener. This idea that the reveal at the end of the film is that they meet on this bridge at the top of the movie where he sees her and she's considering jumping off this bridge, and he sees her as a potential mark, if you will, to be his assistant for knife throwing. But it's at the end of the film that it's revealed that he was also going to that bridge to jump off himself.
Well, he does give the game away, and not in a way that I think anyone would pick up on. Certainly not designed for him to pick up on the first time around. Yeah. When he is in the ambulance, he says that he says, I can't remember what the exact wording is, but he says something that suggests that he was also there to kill himself. And then saw her and was like, what's one more, trip down this old path.
Which is basically his sales pitch. Yeah. His sales pitch is like, if we're going to go out, let's go out in a blaze of glory, which like also, look, having been through, serious bouts of depression and anxiety, and messed with these thoughts a little bit, not scaring anyone, never got anywhere near it. But like the idea of being suicidal, you cannot be convinced by somebody telling you, don't try it, life is worth living, and that stuff. So if she hadn't actually jumped, I think that this is a very underrated element of this movie. If she hadn't actually jumped and he jumped in after her, to save her, I think that would have been significantly more problematic from a mental health standpoint.
Sure.
Than what we got, because this is, as I said, I thought they died, but they did kind of die, right? There is certainly an ego death going on there that happened, and then they were reborn, almost feeling like this is our second chance, and let's live life to the fullest. Is not really what I'm trying to get at.
Well, they're also playing with house money to liken it to a casino.
That's what I'm getting
experience. Yes. It's just like they both sort of made the decision to one extent or another to end their lives, and then didn't, and are just like, well, whatever, I'll let you throw knives at me. Like, what have I really got to lose at this point?
I want to, just for our listeners, I want to give just a touch of context for the people that might not have seen this film. I'm just going to read a very brief synopsis. One chilly night on a Paris bridge, a girl leans out over the Seine with tears in her eyes, contemplating the icy waters below. Suddenly, a stranger with a penetrating gaze emerges out of the darkness, a man who will change her life. It is Gabor, a once brilliant but now fading performer in need of a partner. He has set his sights on this luckless but oddly alluring Adele, a girl with nowhere to go, who is shifting nervously on the edge of a decision. The film was written by Serge, I want to say Friedman. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, and Patrice Leconte. Girl on the Bridge screened at the Telluride Film Festival on September 11th, 1999, and it was released theatrically throughout the United States in 2000. It would ultimately make a little under $2 million in the U.S. It has 88%.
Today would make it a massive success by, subtitled film standards.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's not actually that bad, but it has 88% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 91% from audiences. I just want to read a little blurb from Ebert's 3.5-star review. What's best about the movie is its playfulness. Occupations like knife throwing were not uncommon in silent comedy, but modern movies have become depressingly mired in ordinary lifestyles. In many new romantic comedies, the occupations of the characters don't even matter because they're only labels. There's a setup, scene in an office, and everything else is after hours. Here, knife throwing explains not only the man's desperation to meet the woman, but also the kind of woman he meets and the way they eventually feel about each other. Dr. Johnson once said that the knowledge that you will be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully. There is nothing like being partners in a knife throwing act to encourage a man and woman to focus on their relationship. I think that this, Kenny and I texted a little bit about this, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on this. Obviously, David, being a critic yourself, I mean, Ebert was obviously a huge critic, right? I mean, he was perhaps one of the biggest in terms of his readership. At the same time, it feels like his perspective on sex or sexy, quote unquote, sexy movies wasn't always the best. I feel like he made it very binary when I think there's just a lot more definition to it. This is a very positive review. I'm not saying it's not. He sees it as like a hot movie when maybe it's when I think there's.
I want to just
please.
just make my position on Ebert here clear.
Yeah,
I think, and I think Ebert was, we've talked about this a million times, my favorite critic and very important to me for so much of my life. But whenever he talked about sex in movies, he acted as if there was no love, there was only sex, and love could only exist within the context of sex. And he pushed that forward proudly to me. So in this review, he talks about what's the director's name again?
Patrice Leconte.
He talks about Leconte's films Leconte's approach to films as he is fascinated by the lengths to which people will go for sexual fulfillment.
Right.
And that is not what I got from this film whatsoever.
Sure.
David, you said something early on about how this is reassurance for soft boys, that there are other ways to get a girl other than, wowing them with your sexual prowess. And I think that's the only way to get a girl other than wowing them with your sexual prowess. That's not a real thing. So I think what's so powerful about this film is the way sex is literally put on the back burner. This isn't a sexless movie.
Yeah.
They show her having sex with other men. So sex exists in this world. There is something more that is posited here that has nothing to do with sexual fulfillment. So that was my position in that.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean when you're talking about the way that Ebert sometimes talked about sex, but I also, and I'm sure that, if you look at enough of his reviews, maybe you see some commonalities between them. And this is a guy who wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and I don't hold that against him, but he had a sort of brusque mid-century attitude towards sex, but I also appreciate, as a critic working in the modern space who gets flack whenever they acknowledge that sex exists in the film, that there was a glorious time in this country when film critics could be horny on Maine. And I think that sex is such a central part of film, of image, not necessarily in always in a positive way. And we can talk about gays and all of the thing that goes along with the way that it's been co-opted over the years that cinema's existed. But I think that there is kind of a willful denial of it that we now see expressed in the movies themselves. You were talking about the sex scenes of the last 20 years. And I think a part of that is that the dominant force in cinema, not that, well, actually, there was a time when a lot of those sexual films, those Joe Esterhaus, Paul Verhoeven movies were raking in the dough. But the biggest force in the box office these days is Marvel, and in the Marvel universe, there is not sex; there is barely kissing. So I think that's a kind of a ripple effect. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm always sensitive to people deciding things about film critics based on a scattering of reviews, because I know how quickly these things are written in a hurry. But as much as I envy Roger Ebert for the time relative to the time that I get to write something that he had, and the column space that he had to fill relative to the demands of modern critics. Anyway, I agree. I think that there's something. The movie has a very interesting relationship with sex, and I think it's just that it's not about that. I mean, it recognizes her sexual value and an appeal to men. It recognizes that sex has been a double-edged sword for her. It is the way of her testing her luck, but it also often finds her hoisted on her own petard, so to speak, where it's like by using sex as the currency to find men, she often finds men who are only interested in her for sex. And she turns on them in a dime, which is really funny, particularly with Takis in the boat at the end, where, they're sitting on the boat and she's trying to force a smile, and Daniel Auteuil uses his force talk to be like, he's a bum. And she's like, yeah, I know. I mean, I know. They were just together. And, I think it's easy to, and again, if the movie came out these days, to extrapolate these sort of passing generalizations about what that means
right.
for about women and men, and Patrice Leconte, as a number of French male directors of a certain age were wont to do, passing these they saw women in a certain light often. And I think Patrice Leconte's body of work reflects a more nuanced understanding and use of women than maybe you would assume if this is the only film of his that you'd seen. But I think it is playing into these broadly coded romantic gestures where it's but also rubbing against them. It's like they are this kind of mismatched pair. He's a lot older than he is. He is, this disgusting, decrepit creature is over the age of 40. Just like throw him on a fucking
throw him in the garbage pile. Yeah, he's done.
Disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. Like,
he is above board about the fact, he says it very upfront. Like, I don't ever sleep with my assistant. Like, I don't ever sleep with my partners. Like, it's clear that it's not a sexual thing for him.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think so.
You know what I mean?
I wanna go back to so much of what you were talking about, David. There's like a lot in there that I was really kind of intrigued by. First of all, be horny on Maine, please. It's important. It is important because that is the other thing that I did love about Ebert. I think it's important to acknowledge relative attractiveness in films sometimes.
The problem is when you only had male critics and they were being overly horny on Maine, and then of course, you're just continuing the biases and the gaze that you see on screen. But if we have this, utopian critical community where you have everyone with an equal voice, then everyone can be horny and respectful, and the movies can acknowledge that.
Well, and then I have the problem with film criticism, with the expectation that film criticism should be working from more progressive cultural space than the works they're actually discussing. That doesn't make sense to me. You should certainly be allowed to be as horny or hornier than the films you are watching, and acknowledge when a film is hornier or hornier than others. So yeah, I think that's important. In terms of this film, look, I always go back to Harold and Maude, because there was nothing about Harold and Maude that I thought was gross. Because what Harold and Maude was sell me two people who genuinely loved each other and needed each other. And all the other shit washes away, right? It's when it doesn't work, like Richard Gere and Winona Ryder in Autumn in New York, that you start saying, oh, this is terrible. Why is it terrible? So in this movie, I didn't even think and I'm very sensitive to this shit because I live on the internet too. But I didn't think about it for half a second because this movie did such an incredible job of selling their symbiosis.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, and it uses romance. I mean, yes, you think of them in romantic terms together but there's even at the end, when they sort of ride off into the sunset, or the camera rides off in the sunset and leaves them where they are, there's not necessarily the promise that they're going to embark on some sort of sexual relationship. It is more about a cosmic partnership of some kind, of these two loners, one who is too jaded to allow himself to be needed by anyone. He's only using them for his act, and his act consists of putting them in grievous bodily harm potentially. And she, who's so desperate to be fulfilled, to have that sort of other half, that she is not really vetting the men who are, like, anyone who flashes her a smile. She's so unsure of her own value that she thinks that anyone who's going to show even a passing sexual interest, this beautiful 21-year-old girl, and horrifying, by the way, to see that she's 21 now, now that I am no longer 15. But they are just sort of these perfect foils for each other and can balance each other out in a cosmic/chemical way. And whether or not they ever decide to touch one another, or if it's only going to be the knives between them, is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. That's how I feel. Yeah.
Well, I would also say too, you brought up something there that I think is incredibly important. It's a movie about self-worth, right? It's about how they perceive themselves. He perceives himself as, a disgusting over 40 knife thrower whose hand shakes, and she doesn't even. I mean, Allegedly, and then at the end, or near the end, when she runs away with the groom of that wedding,
Takis, yes.
who asks her what side of the bed she likes, and like that's all it takes, right? Is that someone to acknowledge her existence and what might make her happy for however long. The bar is so low for these two in terms of someone acknowledging them for being worth something. I mean, at the end, I would say that. Obviously there's the inverse of it seems as though he's saving her at the beginning and she's saving him at the end, but
it's very The Blind Side. Like, I thought we were saving him, and it turns out he was saving us.
It's very much The Blind Side. But
we class it at film school. We call it a blind side.
We call it a blind side.
Yeah. You just blindsided me with that.
But I do think that there is something to what you're saying, which is that they realize that the power that they have together, the power of their partnership, and that it is, I mean, it is sensual. It's not sexual, but there is some sort of there's obviously two of them. I mean, I think that if there's a lot of all the knife throwing scenes, I guess in some form or another are sort of sex scenes, but the scene by the train tracks with the light streaming in through the slats of the wood,
Mary and Faithful, that song, seared into my brain.
Right. I mean, and it's that scene is obviously that what leads into that scene is her saying, "I'll do it anywhere you want to do it. Like, it just needs to be right now." Like, there's definitely this component of, there's a sensuality to what they're doing.
Well, what's interesting, the movie really has it both ways, in a way that a lot of classic films and maybe films to this day continue to, which is that even though it is this perversely chaste, innocent thing that is rooted in a kind of not sexlessness, but background sex, it wouldn't work if these were two unappealing people. You have to want to look at them, and that is kind of you have to feel a sexual tension even if it's not going to be fulfilled, and like that is an energy that again is more honest to the voyeuristic experience of watching people in life than people may want it to be, but.
It might work if they were less attractive. I know I sound like a devil's advocate and just a contrarian and maybe a bit of a dick, but it might work. Like that's kind of the Harold Maude of it for me. Like the fact that they don't actually have sex, but I equated immediately. Those are sex scenes to me. That was hot.
Oh yeah,
this is a hot movie to me.
For sure.
I mean, I mean, she's like orgasmic. I mean, it's not subtle.
It's not subtle.
It is a magic. Like that in and of itself is a magic act that I wouldn't put it past the movie to do it with. They're not going to do it with whatever.
Harold and Maude, for instance.
Yeah, it would be a joke, but that's unfair, right? That's an unfair way that's an unfair way to treat those characters. And I mean, that's another thing I love about Harold and Maude. They treated it straight.
But it's also like this idea that I think you get from the carnival element of it, and then like the booker who is very sort of mercenary about taking this act and that act, is that they are in this big and bustling world where women are jumping off bridges and grooms are leaving their wives on ships, and it does kind of feel like every man for them or every person for themselves. And it's so lonely and isolating, and you see how quickly that takes root at the end when they're in Istanbul and he's on his own for 5 minutes and he's basically living in a flop house and on the street and wearing a sign for a living, and how quickly they fall apart without one another. And it's like they find there's something, it's obviously rooted in this sort of heightened romance and in this metaphysical place, but there's something between them and they have to cultivate. I mean, it gives them an ability to hear one another across space and time. It gives them a sense of belonging and purpose. And it's just, for all the romance of the movie, they are, to me, surrounded by this really vast sea of loneliness, of like everyone sort of being on their own. And it doesn't really matter what the thing is that they use to complete one another. No. But that they are able to form this partnership is kind of everything.
Well, I think you also, you mentioned that first sort of in Monaco when they're in this sort of carnival-esque sort of show, if you will. You have that contortionist, that great scene with the contortionist on the top of the piano.
Yeah. We stand. Yeah.
we stand the contortionist. And just sort of the fact that this movie also finds a way to make each one of these set pieces. I mean, throwing knives at a person, just as a writer, finding ways to sort of twist and turn and make that compelling each time in order to build the stakes of it, in order to make it feel different, putting her on the wheel of death, if you will, making it blind. I mean, doing all these sort of things that make it, again, dialed up that much more, but believably so, I think is also a testament to how sort of nimble this film is in terms of tone.
Yeah. And, I don't want to make too fine a point about it, but like, because this is really a film that is about sort of the feelings that it conjures and its surface pleasures. But there is kind of an element when you're talking about like the raising of the stakes in the way that they do the knife routine, and it's always a little bit more deadly. And if you extrapolate that over a long enough period of time, you talk about a relationship with someone that you're like, oh, you're dating, and now you're dating exclusively, and then you're moving in, and now you're getting married. Like the stakes are going up. You are ticking down to death. I mean, like this is how it goes, and you are making these increasingly significant commitments to one another. And this does feel like a way of hyper intensifying it and the life cycle of a relationship in a way. And then it's an interesting contrast to Takis and his bride who, jump into an actual marriage that has absolutely no strength to it and falls apart by the end of the ceremony.
Sometimes simple metaphors are the best, particularly in a movie like this it has such guts in so many ways. The simple metaphor of the getting nicked by a knife almost every time, of bleeding, of the woman taking the majority of the risk and the majority of the the pain, the punishment in a relationship feels right to me too. But like that shit would feel so schlocky if it weren't for the guts that he has in so many other elements. Because I'm thinking, again, the Punch Drunk Love thing, Paul Thomas Anderson does one kind of flight of fancy thing. Adam Sandler all of a sudden becomes the best fighter, strongest man in the world. And he says, I have a love in my life and it makes me stronger than anything you'll ever know. Which is, a little flight of fancy. I get what you're doing here. That's this movie writ large. I have a love in my life. Now I can talk across a continent. And you just get into that. You just get into that and into that and into that. I think that's also the reason that kind of stuff and the knife throwing, all these heightened elements, that's also the reason why sincerity works so well. Like it leads with silliness and irony, but the base of this, the sincerity of it is why I love it so deeply.
And it never blinks. It never like winks to the camera and is like, we get how cheesy this could be, but we're really with you. I mean, it really just continues leaning harder and harder into it, as you were saying, and there's the music is carrying it along. And what was I going to say? I totally lost my train of thought. I was thinking I got too busy daydreaming about the romance of European casino plaques. It's like so much cooler than a chip. These stacks that they have. And I always watch like the European poker tournaments on TV and shit, and just be like, man, what I wouldn't give for one of those. I would pay more money than one of those plaques is worth just to have it in front of me in my cards. But I think I'll just. I
also want to say, you mentioned something, Kenny, that I think is interesting about her getting nicked, and periodically. I love the fact that whenever that happens, it's because of their connection to each other. I sense that you were tensing, or this sort of this emotional connection they have, where he almost feels her body at the other side of the room, this physical, emotional, spiritual almost connection that they have, and how that's dangerous in its own way. I think it's really
dangerous to give a shit about somebody else in this world, right? Especially if your job is to throw knives at them. I mean, like that's definitely a part of it where it's like you have to think, you go back, these are characters that are fun to imagine where they were before this, and the movie starts with her 7-minute monologue about exactly that. But it also feels like it's such a snow globe of a movie, and that like it doesn't really exist outside of when it begins and ends. It's a closed film, but you have to imagine like he alludes to some sort of romantic hardship, or a number of them, and like what kind of man does a job where even if he's not falling in love or sleeping with these women, where he is throwing knives at his body. I mean, like a good night is when he doesn't bleed his partner out. And there is kind of there's that element there, which I think makes the bond between them all the more special. There's also an element of hope that's just like, it doesn't always work out for her, but the idea that like the next town, the next guy that looks at you, the next stop, the next night on your circus tour, like could be the one that turns it all around. And there is, for as lightly as it takes suicide, there is, I think, to bring things like a heavier direction. And there's a movie called The Bridge, which was a documentary, I think also in the late 90s or early 2000s, about people who had survived jumping off of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I would just always remember how, and there's also another movie, by the way, called The Girl on the Bridge that was made just in the last 2 years about suicide in New Zealand. And there's also an older classic film called The Girl on the Bridge. There's a lot more in common with this movie than any of those do. But I was thinking about the people on the Golden Gate Bridge and how, like, to a person, the ones who were miraculously survived that drop all said that as soon as their feet left the bridge, they regretted trying to kill themselves. And there is that like thing, finding the next sort of like nibble, finding the next reason to get up in the morning, and then the hope that the next person you meet could be the one that turns it all around. And it's always sort of in the last place you look, right? Like ideally, like every marriage is going to end poorly because someone's going to die, and that's the best case scenario. I mean, it's the amour of it all. But the best thing you can hope for is that you will meet someone who's going to.
Well, that brings me sort of back to the end a little bit. We talked a little bit about the fact that they never consummate the relationship romantically. In this, they never kiss, they never have sex. Sure. And that hug that they have at the end, where he basically jump cuts it and makes you live that hug like 3-4 times, just to really hit home for you that like these two are meant to be together. They just don't necessarily need to be together in a cliche, kissing and all that sort of nonsense.
It's the victory lap that he's
100%,
taking at the end.
100%.
And again, to have the balls to do that in this type of movie, to know you stuck the landing like that, having done this crazy shit. It's such a confident piece of work. That's part of why I was so blown away.
And I think it's fun as a viewer to imagine that there are people like this out there in the world, that we live in a world, no matter how heightened the movies world might be, where these kind of stories could even be dreamed of, let alone take place. And it fills your life with that extra dollop of romance that, especially, I mean, if you're not with someone, it gives you the hope that you can find an element of that fantasy for yourself.
It's interesting. I have not watched this film probably since back in 99, 2000. I mean, as I mentioned, there's really no way to do it. But I haven't really watched it. And when I pressed play the other day, within 5 minutes, I was taken back to literally those feelings of seeing it back in 99 and just being like, oh, right, this is a masterpiece. Like, this movie is beautiful. This movie is just so wildly confident, as Kenny said, so wildly romantic. It just knows what it's doing from the jump. You've seen a lot of movies, David, obviously. It's your job. And I think you can attest that a lot of movies don't have that confidence, that when they start, you immediately within the first 10 minutes, you can be like, well, okay, so all right, this is going to be a bit of a slog. This film is so graceful. It moves at a quick clip. It's 90 minutes. It knows what it's doing. It doesn't overstay its welcome. I enjoy the film.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, Patrice Leconte is a really interesting director to dive into. I mean, he has as many misses as he does hits, and he has, as a lot of French directors of a certain age do, a penchant for these kind of sitcom grade comedies that he's really sunk into in the last couple of years as he's slowed down. But by the time he made this, I mean, he'd already had a huge hit with Ridicule. He had made The Hairdresser's Husband and Monsieur Curé. He'd been working for decades. And it does kind of feel like one of those lightning bolt moments where it's like someone who knew their way around a set in the business and it had the pull to make this happen. Just like it all kind of came together, and not necessarily in a way that resonated for audiences worldwide, and made it in this kind of a movie that is available in the Western world. But it does feel like everything that he was trying to do was kind of synthesized in this one bottle of lightning, and then kind of diminishing returns after. I mean, The Widow of St. Pierre, which he made like right away after that, and The Man on the Train, and also Intimate Stranger. These are all like some of his best movies. He was kind of in the pocket around this time, but it does kind of feel like a high that he and we, the people who continue to follow his career anyway, were chasing to no avail.
Sure. So Kenny, do you want to rate this movie? Are you interested in doing that?
Yeah, I do. I am.
Okay.
Yes.
So just to basically, David, what we do is we rate the film from 0 to 99, 0 being the lowest, 99 being the highest, 50% being, I think we all know that we all love this film, but basically you'll rate it for what you thought at 99, you'll rate it before this podcast, and then after, if it's changed, if this conversation has changed your opinion on it one way or the other. But I'll go first. In 99, said I saw this film, loved it back then. I probably would have given it about a 90 back then. I mean, I really loved it. But I have to say that looking at it now through the lens of who I am now and what the world is now, I loved it even more. And I don't know what that says. I don't know if it's that I haven't left my apartment in almost a year. So I don't know if that's affecting. I'm sure it is to some degree or another. But I was just so swept away by the romanticism, the characters, the photography. I desperately wanted to see this on the biggest screen I possibly could, and it's a real wonderful movie. So I'm at a 95 or a 96 now. I think that's basically where I am on it. But where are you, Kenny?
Look, this is like my favorite kind of movie. An unabashedly romantic movie that is able to do that in a way that is not cloying or embarrassing. Which is kind of, the thing that happens so often is like at some point you get kind of embarrassed watching a movie that's so unabashedly romantic. But I was so absolutely into this, so taken with every element of it. One of the best films of 99, without question. I gave it a 97. I'm going to continue to give it a 97, which is one of the highest ratings I've given all year.
It's true.
Wow. I'm so glad that I could instigate your discovery of this film. That's so cool. I mean, I think, Phil, you hit on something that is hard for me to deny, which is that I had the good fortune of seeing this movie on the big screen and like really envelop myself in it back in the day. And again, talking about sort of my sponge brain self back then, I think I was just so receptive to it that it's impossible to match that high. And so I think my 15-year-old self probably would have told you that this was like, and I was already gearing up to for my shitty life as a critic to like really become and so I think that brain of mine was already, shooting down any scores for anything that was too high. I had to remember to keep things in check. So I think I probably back then would have been like, this is a solid out of 99. I put it like an 89. 90s for losers, an 89.
Yeah, that's pretty. It's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good for a cool kid.
Like the Pitchfork 7.9. It's like that's what they give all the great albums. It was like a solid 89 for me. And I think now, by no fault of the movies, but simply because it just feels like a less aromatic and complete experience watching it on, as I did today on my computer display. Sure. I have to kick it down to like, let's say an 84.
Okay.
But that is still pretty good in my books.
Well, so David, very curious to hear what your thoughts are on the film that we're covering next week. We have Darren Franich coming on from Entertainment Weekly to talk about Three Kings with us. And I'm curious as to what your David O. Russell thoughts are, or on Three Kings.
It's an interesting, oh boy.
Yeah.
I already regret my 84 for the record. I said it out loud and it just like, I could feel
it's been seconds.
I know.
Wait, is it too low or too high? Too high?
Low. It was too low.
Too low. Good.
Yeah,
Let's
get it up.
Let's go to like an 87.
Great.
All right. I like it.
This is why I can't do podcasts and why I do writing, on text, because I'll sit here and finesse over a review for as much time as I have, which is usually not much, but like I'll be able to like be like, no, that sentence does not come out right. And on podcasts, I think the simplest thing takes 4 times as long. So I'm always like, well, no.
This has been fantastic. You have said nothing that I haven't absolutely loved.
The Three Kings. I mean, David O. Russell seems like a truly a shitbag of a human being. that is not something that obviously in recent years, the conversation about the art and the artist, it gets complicated. I have no problem loving good movies from bad people. Less so excusing their behavior and saying, because they give us these movies. And David O. Russell wouldn't be in that category, even if I could necessarily. It's I Heart Huckabees, which is probably my favorite movie of his.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Whatever torment he visited upon people to make it, I don't know if it's
not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, especially given the message of that movie and how you would think he if he'd internalized it at all, may have found ways to be kinder. Whatever. I think really I think it says, nothing good about me that I really didn't sour on David O. Russell until I soured on his movies. And I think starting with The Fighter, his whole, we're going to light 360 degrees and just like go for pure energy and shoot and, let your Mark Wahlbergs and not that Mark Wahlberg wasn't in I Heart Huckabees and Three Kings, but just that sort of energy that was immediately baked in the cake with The Fighter and really came to life in the Silver Linings Playbook and then died in front of you with joy. And American Hustle, which is American Hustle is truly a wretched film. I agree. That one really drove me to my limits. I remember clawing at my arms to get out of the theater when I saw that.
But why didn't more people say that at the time?
Listen,
because I thought it was the worst fucking movie of all time too.
The New York Film Critics Circle anointed it as their best film of the year, and so I then made it my mission to join the New York Film Critics Circle and
never let that happen
cure
again.
The poison
and destroy it from within.
Yeah. And I've been doing my best to do that ever since. I will point out, as I often have, that American Hustle has not won Best Film once since I became a member of the New York Film Critics.
Yeah, you've succeeded in your goal.
I take responsibility for that.
David, what won this year? I'm just curious.
That's a good question because this wasn't really a real year in our world. I believe it was. I know it was First Cow, which was a good movie.
I love First Cow.
Yeah, can't argue with First Cow.
But Three Kings. Do you have thoughts on it?
I saw it in the year 1999, which makes sense for this context.
Sure.
I don't think I was as taken with it. I think in the shadow of Fight Club, which is such a formative movie, Magnolia, which even more so, and Being John Malkovich, and even a movie that I am now embarrassed to have responded to as much as I did when I was 15. The Three Kings didn't really pierce through the way that it did for some other people. I mostly just remember George Clooney doing his thing and Ice Cube and Spike Jonze. And
Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, but I left him out of that for a reason. And sort of the energy between them. But I think a lot of the political baggage that film carried with it was lost on me at the time. And it's not something that I've seen bits and pieces of it on cable in the years since, but it's not something I've sat down and rewatched as a whole. And because of my growing distaste for David O. Russell, is not something I wanted to make time to do.
Fair enough.
But it's an episode as a listener, I'd be interested in hearing just because it sounds more pleasant than just submitting myself to the
I mean, I'll admit I don't think I've sat down to watch Three Kings credits to credits in a long time.
I haven't since 99. I'm
super excited to do it because I think it's a film that has grown in esteem. I think a lot of people still believe that it's perhaps David O. Russell's best film. And obviously has a lot of drama around it, him and Clooney and all that sort of, what have you. So there's stuff that kind of in the periphery that doesn't really have to do with the film itself. So I'm excited to kind of look at the film and try to be critical of the film. And I'm excited to sort of, honestly, just to watch it again. Spike Jonze is an actor. I love him. I wish he acted more, quite frankly. He's great in Wolf of Wall Street.
Great in Wolf of Wall Street.
Great Moneyball.
Great Moneyball. Yeah. So I'm excited to watch it. John Ridley, who's obviously his career has gone on and done many things since it. He doesn't feel as though his script was perhaps respected as much as it should have been back in at the time. I know.
Talk to the writers of Joy, and they can form a support group. I mean,
Annie Mumolo and him can sit down and talk.
Writing for David O. Russell is not a fate that I would wish upon my worst enemy.
It's David O. Russell's career has obviously kind of gone like this in terms of quality and also in terms of the public opinion of him.
Sure,
but for whatever reason, Three Kings never seemed to the glow never seemed to come off Three Kings.
Correct.
Even someone who is an avowed hater of David O. Russell generally has to sit back and say, but Three Kings is pretty good. So I'll be interested to see if it is that kind of thing. Now, I actually like David O. Russell quite a bit. I feel the same way you do about American Hustle. I think it's terrible, and I think
Joy's
Silver
pretty
Linings Playbook's pretty terrible. I think Joy's okay, but I also have very low expectations for Joy.
Okay.
Yeah, but I love I Heart Huckabees. I think it's a masterpiece. But I'm
excited.
I do think Three Kings kind of eluded all that. I don't even think people think of it as a David E. Russell movie as much as just a good heist war movie with some fun actors. So I'll be interested to watch it again.
There's some kind of rhyme between I Heart Huckabees and The Girl on the Bridge, and talking about like the everyone being connected as molecules and bundle up here and there, and the connections that are sort of forged between them, and that film's overall. I mean, obviously, I Heart Huckabees comes at it from like a hard line philosophical point of view, that The Girl on the Bridge sort of internalizes into romance. But I can see those movies being an interesting double feature.
David O. Russell, and not to extrapolate and speculate, but it's pretty obvious, I think, has some issues with his mother that I can really relate to. And in some of his films, particularly I Heart Huckabees, the Talia Shire Jason Schwartzman relationship gives me hives. So I think it's an unbelievably well observed dynamic.
Well, I mean, I'm so thankful that you took the time, David, to come on and talk with us about this film and talk about David O. Russell, your favorite filmmaker, obviously. And
who I was named after.
But we thank you so much for coming on, and we hope that maybe you'll come back on for something else in the future. That'd be really great.
What other movies were made in 1999? You guys haven't got to yet.
We got a lot. So
really?
You want to come on? You want to come on for a good one or a bad one?
Well, I have to see too many bad movies as part of my day job.
Well, we also have a 1989 Patreon as well, so we're covering the films of '89. So I'm going to send you a list of all the good ones, and hopefully you can take the time to come back on, because we'd really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
1999 podcast like it. You want a podcast like it? 1999.